Welcome back to another episode of La ICIJ Podcast. I'm Hector.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Eddie.
And we are going to talk about a lot today because there is a lot that is going on throughout all of Southern California, really, the whole state of California. Ben, why don't you get us started because you are exhausted today from last night. We can probably start there.
Yeah, so ICE and probably other federal agencies have brought in people probably from all over the country. So they're staying at hotels. And so that has given rise to this hashtag no sleep for ICE. And last night, we were able to identify a hotel in City Rancho Cucamonga where federal agents are staying. And so rapid mobilization. We got probably about 100 people out there.
Wow.
And making a lot of noise, lots of drums, lots of cowbells, speaker systems. I had my vuvuzela from the World Cup days. And we were saying, si no nos dejan soñar, no los dejamos dormir.
Wow.
Because they're stealing people's dreams right now.
Yeah. And you, what time were you there until last night?
We finally left at about midnight. It's kind of started dissipating, but I heard people were there until like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Wow.
They were there until like, and that's great that so many people showed up. I mean, that was like quick. That was like we
Totally
saw
less
that
mo-
they were staying at that hotel.
Yeah,
We put something out and folks started to show up.
yeah, it was great.
Nice. Well, obviously that is in response to the hundreds and hundreds of people who are being wiped off of our streets here in Southern California, LA, Orange, San Bernardino, Riverside counties, with massive raids that are going down in our region. They started June 11th, I think, Friday, June 11th, if that's right, in downtown Los Angeles with a massive raid at the Allianz apparel warehouse in the garment district in Los Angeles. And it's just been nonstop since then, leading to hundreds of protests all across our region, really. The deployment of the National Guard. And just so much unrest and fear really that's going on in our communities. I think the latest number that I saw that they had put out was 330 people arrested in Southern California. Obviously that number has grown significantly because that raids have just been nonstop.
Are you talking about arrests of the people who are in the streets protesting
330
ICE?
people detained.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, 330 people that ICE has detained. ICE Border Patrol.
Uh-huh. I think it's higher because
Yeah,
the last
no,
report
definitely.
we had from ACLU was like just over 1,100, and that was also several days ago. And I think yesterday I was on a call, and they said they were almost maxed out because it's like at DVA, the Desert View Annex, they reported was at capacity, and I think they hold like 750, something like that. And at Adelanto Ice Processing Center, they have almost 2,000 beds, like
Yeah.
1,800, 1,900 beds.
Mhm.
So I think they're filling up, and I think that's why they're starting to transfer people to Texas and to Tacoma. And our IE people, they're holding them in the downtown Metropolitan Detention Center,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Yeah, we were at Adelanto yesterday during a press conference with Congress members, and it was either a Congress member or a family member, they mentioned how one of their loved ones was transferred over to Tacoma, to Washington. So they were detained here, arrested here in California, and then transferred over to Tacoma, to another detention facility run by a private prison company there. But right now, the almost the exact amount is around 1,050 people in Adelanto,
Okay.
and it does have capacity for another 1,000 people.
Oh, wow. Well, which makes no sense, because if they have room, why would they send local people to these far-off detention centers?
Right. Yeah.
Except for to deliberately deprive them of their social network support,
Yeah.
their access to counsel, access to family members, which is cruel.
Yeah. I think that's really important to touch on because a lot of people just don't understand what happens after
Right.
people get arrested. They see the visuals, they see everything on social media, or they're there presently in the moment at a protest, at a march, or they're defending a call of, hey, we saw ICE, they're picking up this person. What happens to them after that, right? And so they get sent to facilities like the one in Adelanto, and then what happens to them from there, right? That was part of the reason why we were there yesterday. So, Hector, you were kind of organizing that. Do you want to touch on why we were there in Adelanto yesterday?
Yeah, well, Adelanto, the ICE processing center, is one of the biggest on the West Coast, with one of the most egregious records of human rights violations. ICIJ is anchored to the Shutdown Adelanto coalition that's been fighting for the closure of that facility for a little over a decade now. We got really close last year. There was only 3 people being detained in that facility with a capacity of over 1,900. Unfortunately, the previous administration chose not to close the detention center down, leaving this huge instrument of terror and trauma that they can inflict on all of the mass deportations that are happening now. We went 2 weeks ago on Sunday with Congresswoman Judy Chu of Pasadena, Congressman Derek Tran of Orange County, and Congressman Gil Cisneros of the San Gabriel Valley. And we were denied access, actually. As soon as we got there, the guards came and they closed the gates, not allowing anyone in and out. And we were there yelling that, we're here with 3 members of Congress who have the legal right to enter and have unannounced inspections in detention centers. Is actually something that came out of the first Trump administration. Through appropriations, they had put in some language there to give members of Congress that right to make unannounced visits to detention centers. And that's what we were attempting to do, and they were denied access. We had a guard that was no more than 10 feet away from us who can clearly hear us saying there are 3 members of Congress here who have the right to have this inspection, and just no one would come up to speak to us. No one would engage with us at all. We were there for close to 3 hours, and it's really hot in Adelanto, like just outside of the detention center, trying to get access, and we were denied. And so what happened yesterday was a part 2 of that attempt, right? The further escalation of that. Again, with Congresswoman Judy Chu, with more folks this time, Congressman Martocano of Riverside, Luz Rivas of the San Fernando Valley, Linda Sanchez of Pico Rivera, and Sidney Camalago-Dove of Culver City. So there was 5 of them this time, and they were given access. I think it's because they have seen that there's going to be more attempts like this, so they've probably put in an effort to clean up the facility. Make it not as bad as it was, and so now they're letting folks in with more access. The members were doing about a 2-hour inspection in there, in which they were able to speak to some, not as many as they wanted to, but some of the folks that are being detained there. And they had real questions about the conditions that are in the facility. Folks who have been detained and haven't had a change of clothes in days, haven't had access to a shower, and if they have had access to a shower, there are showers that are in really poor conditions that they also have to clean themselves. Folks who don't have a clean change of undergarments, or who are being offered used undergarments because the facility just doesn't have the resources for how quickly they've been repopulating in there. A lot of the folks in there are not even folks who are detained in California. We talk about the folks being detained in California as being sent somewhere else. There were a lot of folks there who were detained in Miami, the members of Congress were telling us. And so that is, of course, deliberate, to separate these people from their lawyers or their legal advocates that they had wherever that they were detained, from their family members who can't visit them now. And so we had a press conference immediately following their visit to kind of amplify this to the rest of California, the rest of the nation. The Inland Empire is not being highlighted as much in what's going on in the raids, but we have that ICE processing center where people from all over the country are transferred over. And so it was super important to make sure we have that inspection. We're gonna continue to hold GEO and ICE accountable to have more inspections to follow up on the things that we're seeing. But yesterday was at least a step.
What else can members of Congress do to hold GEO accountable for refusing them access, or for the conditions?
Yeah, they can stop appropriating money.
Well, that would be great.
They can cancel their contracts with GEO so that they can stop appropriating the billions and billions of dollars that go to GEO, that go to the whole private industrial complex of prisons and detention centers. But more realistically right now, I mean, these visits are super important, and numbers, having just bigger delegations of members doing these visits and consistently. It can't just be that you show up, you do a 2-hour visit, and then you're done. Like, there has to be follow-up, right? And there has to be more unannounced visits. And it has to be solidarity in the folks that are showing up. And, it was unfortunate that we have 2 members of Congress from the Inland Empire that had 2 opportunities to show up and didn't. And there also happened to be the 2 members of Congress who, in a time where their own communities and their own districts are being raided and their constituents are living in fear of going to work, of going to school, in that time, they chose to instead vote for a resolution to extend their gratitude to ICE.
Oh, you're talking about Torres and Aguilar?
Yeah.
They both voted for that?
Reese. Congresswoman Norma Torres of Pomona, Chino, Ontario. Congressman Raul Ruiz of the Coachella Valley.
I heard about those votes.
I think it was incredibly unfortunate and disappointing that they chose this time any time, but this time of all.
It's
to
ridiculous.
extend their gratitude to ICE. I mean, we thought it was ridiculous, and at first it was like sometimes these resolutions are long and members don't really read them.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, let me open this up, and it was 1 page with 3 points. So there's no excuse that it's long, that it got cut up in the thousands of pages. It was 1 page with 3 points.
What did Marjorie Green Taylor say? I didn't read it.
Yeah. But
there's
see,
no excuses.
that I believe for. That was like a over 1,000-page budget package. So if Marjorie Taylor Greene missed something, then I excuse her for that. But this was a 1-page resolution with 3 points, you know. And it was really disappointing that they chose this time of all to extend their gratitude over to us.
Well, it's really hypocritical of Norma because she was outside the federal building in downtown LA trying to get in the basement, supposedly.
Yeah.
And, doing, going live and doing videos and stuff like that. And then she turns around and does a vote like this.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't totally surprised, and that's
You
because
weren't.
I was not.
Oh, you were
totally
not.
surprised because when I saw the 2 IE reps that voted for it, they also received a shit ton of money from AIPAC,
Mm-hmm.
and that resolution conflated anti-Semitism and the attack in Boulder. So,
Right.
and it attached it to thanking ICE and federal agencies for, conducting law enforcement operations. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, you put 2 and 2 together and you kind of figure out, okay, these are the folks that are not on our side, right? And just going back really quickly to Adelanto, I think another victory in having Congress members do inspections is that their language changes over
Yes.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They start to sound more like us as advocates as they continue to see directly what their policies and their budgets are doing to people and separating families and
Yeah.
these horrid conditions there. So a couple of years ago, if we had the same group of legislators up there, I think it would have been their language would have been a little softer, a little bit more neutral, a little bit more liberal. And now we're almost getting back to where we were back in 2015, 2014, where we're calling for the abolishment of ICE, right? And ever since then, it's just been crickets. Nobody
Mhm.
else has really, at the level of Congress, at the federal level, has really led that charge
Mhm.
anymore. But I think we're slowly making a comeback to calling for that again.
Speaking of members of Congress, what about Aguilar? Because I heard he did his own visit, kind of like just, I don't know, rogue.
Yeah, it was
Is this
interesting
just
because it
his-
was something that I don't think he did in coordination with any community organizations or
Mhm.
legal providers that are on the ground. It was something that he just did. He had received invites from us and from Congresswoman Jew the first time we did the visit, which was before his visit, and the second time, which was after his visit. He went in between those 2 attempts. I'm not sure how much I know on our end he didn't follow up on their end. I'm not sure how much he did. Also not sure if it was a scheduling thing that was going on, but he did go and he did his own visit. I think it was on Saturday, the same day of the No Kings protest, I think. It was an unannounced visit as well. And so why he chose to do that, I don't know. We have been communicating with our office to see, like, what you guys see? Like, can we
Mhm.
get a write-up of everything you guys were able to see?
Yeah.
Or that the congressman was able to see, I should say. But then that also leads to, like, Geo has seen that there's these repeated attempts, so I'm sure they've already made a consistent effort to clean up the facility because they know they're going to come at some point. So we need to, clean stuff up and get people in better conditions so that they make nothing to see here. But yeah, and then that goes to the point that it has to continue happening and be unannounced, and but there has to be the follow-up to those visits as well.
I was just going to quickly add, I saw the video. If you go to Pete's Instagram page, he talks about the visit. He pivots extremely quickly to talk about how the Trump administration sucks.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, hey, I did a visit to Adelanto, and then here's why Trump sucks. But he doesn't go into any of the conditions or what he saw while he was in there. And then I think it was either just today or yesterday where he put out a statement on the LA protest and what's going on. And then in that statement, I don't know if you read it, but he calls for securing the border and, deporting criminals in that same statement where, it's wishy-washy shit.
Yeah. Well, it was similar to what he did in his statement on the Israel-Iran conflict, saying that, we need to stand by Israel, but this is Trump's fault, basically, is
Right.
what he says.
Yeah.
It's basically like a party talking point,
Yeah.
and using anything that happened, any current event, to just be like pro-Dem, anti-Rep.
Yeah, and I think this goes to their overall problem is that, we hear from the members themselves that they think what happened in November last year was some kind of ultimatum to them that if they don't get serious on the border, if they don't get serious on all the issues that Trump had kind of created this faux outrage over, that they were going to continue to lose, and say they now think that they're in a world where their constituency will expect that of them, and they can't even respond to questions about like, well, if you say let's secure the border, what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean that you want to go further than the Republican Party and Trump? And it goes to the real problem that I think they have. It's that they want to have the best of both worlds. They want to be a resistance, but they also want to appease people they think they should be appeasing. And it's like you can't.
The geo groups.
Yeah,
and all those
exactly.
people,
And
yeah.
you can't. You're not offering people, your constituency, an alternative if everything has to be a but. If every statement has to have a but or some kind of a caveat so that you could feel like you're not losing your seat, or that you're not creating a problem, or that you're not taking a stance. And that's the overall problem that we're continuing to see with the folks that we're in conversation with. And I think yesterday's visit is a sign that they need to take it more seriously, and they need to stop playing this game of politics with people's lives, because the thousands of people that they saw come out on Saturday against everything that is going on, I think is a big wake-up call to show that this is something people are taking seriously and they have their eyes on, and they want leaders who can stop bullshitting and actually do something.
Yeah. And I think that sounds like a segue, but I just want to add in on Adelanto before we move on that I know me and Yasmin and the other attorneys that are with IMDEF and some of the other nonprofits that have been going up have been having a really, really hard time getting in to see our clients, just because the massive, tremendous backlog that has been caused by so many people getting arrested, and that it's obviously issues around their right to have, access to counsel and that sort of thing. And yeah, I've gotten a lot of reports about the atrocious conditions in there, especially since last Friday.
Definitely, yeah. Did any of you make it out on Saturday to some protests? I mean, we've been going to protests like every other day because of ICIJ and everything that's going on. But Saturday was the big day for a lot of folks who are not normally out there protesting to go out for this No Kings.
Yeah, it was interesting because most of the protests on No Kings Day were No Kings kind of 50-50.
Sponsored by Walmart, by the way.
I heard. and Hillary Rodham Clinton. And, Indivisible, kind of maybe like progressive Dem somewhere on the spectrum. But there were also some grassroots ones that were definitively not No Kings. They had other titles or slogans.
Right.
And in the city of Ontario, they had been protesting every evening, 5 to 8 or 9, 10, 11 at night on the median on Euclid since Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Not Sunday. And so we went to the Ontario one in the evening that was just basically just anti-ICE. And a lot of community, a lot of support out in the street. So I didn't make it to any of the No Kings ones.
Yeah.
I went to one on Friday in downtown Riverside. That one was very organic. I think there was some confusion as to who was organizing it, but when we got there, it didn't really matter. There was about 300 people or so on a Friday afternoon. That was really good, and it was only up for like about a week or so before people actually were like, "Hey, let's go check this out." And unfortunately, there was the young lady that got critically harmed.
Yeah.
She got run over by a anti-protester in his vehicle. He went out there and he ran this poor young woman over, and we're praying for her. She's in critical but stable condition, and there's a GoFundMe out there for her and her family to support. So maybe we'll link it in the notes for this episode if people want to check out and support.
Yeah, no, definitely. Let's talk about that though, because I think a lot of the attention that has been placed on the protests, at least, I mean, not for the No Kings protests, but the protests that started after the raids in Los Angeles, there was a lot of outlets who unfortunately chose to focus their energies more on this idea of violence happening as a result of these protests. Obviously, I know how you guys feel about that, but let's talk about it. Let's put it out there. What is the problem with this narrative of violence in these protests?
Well, I mean, there's the yellow journalism, the if it bleeds, it leads thing, and the way that narrative is really able to capture the real story, which is the real story is that there is resistance to ICE repression all up and down anywhere it's going on. right? The people do not want this, from the grassroots all the way up to our state legislators, even some of our congressional reps, right?
Yeah.
So that really, I think that narrative undermines the Trump narrative that people are scared of national security, border security, tren de agua, right? We were just talking about this with my partner about how there was 2 arrests, right? One guy, they accused him of, it's on video, so kind of hard to avoid the accusation. He dropped like a little, like a firebomb onto a sheriff's vehicle. And then there was somebody that they were looking for a little while who was throwing rocks at the vehicles. So 2 arrests, right? For violence, right? Vandalism, violence. Out of how many? If there was 2,000 people, give and take, in Claremont on No King's Day, there must have been at least 10, 15, probably more like 30,000 people over the course of those nights before the curfew was instituted. And so if there was 2 arrests out of 30,000, that's like 0.0001%, so and there was graffiti, which I kind of consider differently. But I think if we take a step back, look at things in perspective, it was massively and overwhelmingly nonviolent.
Yeah.
Except for what the police did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is a question that we get asked a lot. We got asked this just a couple of weeks ago from a community member up in the high desert. Hey, doesn't this harm the movement when we're seeing violence being actively done by the folks that are on our side, right? They're protesting ICE, but they're breaking a window or they're getting rowdy with the police and they're starting, they're inciting riots, right? And I think a really egregious path that we're seeing right now being laid out by the U.S. Attorney's Office in L.A., led by IE member, former Assembly member Bill Asaley, or Bilal, because that's her real name, Bilal Asaley. They charged this protester from L.A. with inciting a riot with this federal code for bringing face shields to the L.A. protests to protect themselves from the tear gas that the police are shooting at people, right? And there's been so many videographed evidence of the police shooting tear gas, shooting non-lethal or less lethal ammunition at reporters, people that are actively trying to protect people while they're not looking. So violence,
horse trampling
too, just ridiculous images that we're seeing of people just, not armed with anything, just themselves, just their body, and they can't have a face shield.
And right? let's talk about violence, because we talk about deportation, we talk about forced removal or whatnot, but we don't really name it. We don't really put our finger on it and say deportation is an act of violence.
Yep.
Yeah. I was just going to say violence begets violence. There's so many quotes that we can rattle off by a lot of our amazing civil rights leaders and leaders in the movement, right? But sometimes the one that it's appropriate to me is Malcolm X's "The chickens have come home to roost." And unfortunately, we're seeing that in Minnesota.
Yeah.
We're seeing that in other parts of the country right now where senators are being arrested, right? A lot of the establishment is now actively going against their own forces that they have funded. And so I think they're having an awakening moment. I hope so, for their sake, that they are understanding the situation that they are in politically, because their lives are at stake now more so than ever. Ours have always been at stake. Marginalized people have always been at stake, but now they're realizing, oh shit, maybe this is going to come home to me one day.
Right.
And that's the logic of liberalism.
Yeah. I think that's what gets so lost, right, in this emphasis that people like to have on the violence and how damning it can be to the movement or to the optics or to whatever it is that no one considers the violence that is thrusted upon us. No one considers the fear that you experience when you're just out protesting because of how passionately you feel about what's going on, and there are military tanks driving into your city, people with military style weapons pointed right at you. That is violence, and it's violence both physically and it's violence mentally. The fear that folks live in, that their family members can be wiped out at any minute, that they cannot go out to work or go to school. That is the mental violence that our communities are subjected to and have been subjected to nonstop, and I think that conversation is always lost in this emphasis people like to have on violence. And I'm really bad that I cannot remember the name of this person, civil rights leader, who talked about, because people like to quote Martin Luther King, right? This idea of peaceful resistance and nonviolence, and that if you just resist peacefully, um, you'll tug at people's heartstrings and their moral compass, and they will sympathize with you. That's what happened with
Kwame Ture.
there you go.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that if you just resist peacefully, you let them hit you and you let them beat you and you let them make you cry and you let them show you bleeding out on TV, that'll tug at people's heartstrings and it'll touch their moral compass and they will sympathize with you and that'll change everything, relies on the idea that we live in a country that is morally conscious in that way.
Yeah.
And the reality is that we don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we just don't. The idea that people are just going to react to us being beaten and traumatized and torn away from our families, it's just not going to happen. And people like to say that some voters right now may have buyer's remorse. I don't think it's buyer's remorse, because buyer's remorse is when you don't know what you're paying into. This was always going to be the plan. And he was never shy about saying that this was always going to be the plan. Throughout all of his first presidency, the entire campaign trail, they were never hiding it. They were never trying to have a Trojan horse.
Mm-hmm.
This was always the plan, that it was going to be as violent, it was going to be as public and as horrible as it can possibly make it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what's happening now. And for a country that decided that that is what they wanted, to then now think that we need to hold back and that somehow they're going to come to our rescue is completely false.
Well, there's a lot of debate and discussion about this, especially in the context of the No Kings and the 50-51s and the Indivisibles, because, there's a lot of criticism of they're not being inclusive of multi-issue.
Right.
They're not letting Palestinians take the stage in some locations because it's very highly localized. All the issues that affect our lives and that we're concerned about. But in some ways, this moral bankruptcy of liberalism, if you want to call it that, created the crisis that we're currently in, and it's them coming in, and it's their responsibility to come in and clean up, and that seems like that's what they want to do. How inclusive and how much the direction is towards like something more like justice or social justice or equity it's oriented is, I think, to be questioned and maybe engaged with and dealt with. But at least I think it's those same people that are saying, yeah, we messed up.
Yeah, I think with everything going on in the world, I haven't been able to like really process everything going on in Iran and Israel. But for me, I think it's important to ground ourselves and understand that the U.S. started as a settler colony, and Israel is a settler colony as well. And they're both actively bombing multiple countries in the Middle East right now. And they're also arresting a lot of people in our community that have not only been here for much longer than they have been before they settled in here, right? A lot of people that are getting stopped just by looking brown, right? So a lot of folks that have been arrested for racial profiling. I think that I was listening to a podcast on the way here to the office, and there's a way to think about history, right? A way to kind of reflect on history and understand that while we just talked about the civil rights movement, while this isn't 1964 anymore, but history tends to rhyme. In my opinion, it doesn't really repeat itself, but it does rhyme, right? And we're now seeing a moment where we're rhyming decades past, when a lot of folks are on the street bleeding, dying in the streets, to pass something like the Civil Rights Act, to pass voter rights and the right for folks to go to public school with other races, other ethnicities, other groups. And now we're seeing a lot of those rights slowly being taken away. But in my opinion, if they can be taken away, they weren't rights to begin with, right? They were just something that were borrowed for us. And now we're seeing how fickle our rights really are.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, there are bad eggs that take advantage of opportunities and do just go out to cause chaos. Of course that is. But I mean, I think on the larger scale, like what you said, they have been entirely peaceful, and there have been people who have been more agitated than others because this is real shit that we're going through. And for folks who are maybe listening, think about any great advancement that we've had in this country and try to look back into the pathway to that and try to find something that was nonviolent about it. You're not going to, because the reality is, like Eddie said, these rights that are borrowed onto us are hard earned, and not because people are very nice and because people have big hearts, but because there are thousands and thousands of organizers, of community members who had to bleed, who's died for those rights.
I just think it's very contradictory of people that ask us, hey, why is it okay for this person to be rallying on a protest? But when you tell them, hey, why don't you flip this around and ask yourself why the police, when we talk about police and these bad apples, these bad actors, it's always, oh, it's just that one person. They were acting not reflective of the police as institution, right? Mm-hmm. They weren't representing the institution of policing. It was just them being a bad actor.
Yeah.
Why can't you apply that same logic to when we're talking about protesters that are fighting for immigrant rights?
And right? coming back to Riverside, why did it take Riverside PD 3 days to arrest the person that ran over the young woman at the protest when they had vehicle make model, they had the license plate, they had footage from different angles, they had his face, and now that the girl is in a medically induced coma, instead of charging him with attempted murder, vehicular manslaughter, it's hit and run. Why is that? That's not an institutional problem?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different way that we have seen over the years since the beginning of the George Floyd protests that they have looked for different ways to charge people that are attacking protesters, right? So they're not charging them with the things that you're mentioning that we will more than likely be charged with if it was us causing those.
Yep, definitely. Well, I mean, all of that has brought us to where we're at today, the day we're recording Wednesday. National Guard, there's 2,000 more troops that they're deploying to California today because they're still kind of in the courts and the Ninth Circuit trying to decide whether Trump had the authority to bring out National Guard against the governor's wishes. And the raids are continuing. I mean, we had one this morning in the Coachella Valley, and the reason that we're able to respond so rapidly to all of this and to really get photos and have proper documentation for everything that's going on is because of our hotline. The ICIJ hotline, which is blowing up like day and night. But Ben, you do a lot of rapid response work in our region. Talk to us about that.
It's difficult work. It's draining. It's hard to get out there, in time to witness and document. Right. Also, so I think an important part of it is just interviewing witnesses and being available for the families, and whenever it is that they happen to call, try to get as much information as we can, so we can notice the trends, the changes in the tactics that the ICE is using, and also, try to respond as soon as we can with the legal resources or whatever other resources are needed. But a lot of it is that demystification, like you're talking about how people don't know now, they took them, now what? And it's been a lot of telling families, I'm sorry, but you have to be patient, be persistent, but be patient, keep checking the ICE locator, and then telling them what to tell their family member when their family member finally is able to call, get the A number from the bracelet, tell them not to sign anything, and if they have to go to court before somebody can get in and see them, ask the judge for more time. People think I'm going to see a judge, I'm freaking out, I don't know what to do, I need a lawyer, I need a legal representative right now, without understanding that, the judge actually wants you to have legal representation. And if you don't, they're going to give you time. At least so far, they have been giving people more time so they can get legal representation because the judges understand that the other side has representation. Mm-hmm. ICE has attorneys that their job is to deport people through the legal system. And they know the law and they know the procedure. Whereas me, if I'm in there and I don't know any of that, then it's like me going to battle without a shield or without a weapon. Yeah. And the judge would rather have you have legal representation. So I think people need to understand that. It's a really key message for families, but it's over and over again. And
well, that's something that we're seeing from the judges. What are we seeing in terms of tactics that they're using broadly in SoCal right now?
Yeah, well, a lot of different things. You mentioned the ambiance raid. That was, I think, kind of kicked off the workplace raids. At around the same time, we saw them raiding car washes. And in the last couple of days, we've seen them attempt at least to get into warehouses in the IE, which that's really helps us in some ways because generally a warehouse there's no public access. Yeah. It's not like if they were going to try to raid a grocery store where anybody can go up and down the aisles and only the staff can get in the back, the meat freezer or whatever. The warehouse, unless you got business there, you're not getting in. And so I've heard, I've interviewed people who said that their bosses locked it down. They didn't let anybody out. They wouldn't let ICE in, and ICE, no judicial warrant. They wait around for a little bit. They can't get in, so they leave. And so a lot of workers have escaped, that kind of repression because of proactive supervisors.
Which is good.
Which is great, yeah.
It's great. And, I mean, I think it's also important to remind employers, too, that they are not only they not only have that right to deny access, but California state law, guidance from the Attorney General, compels them to deny that access to ICE if they don't have the judicially signed warrant into their warehouses, into anything that is non-public space in their businesses. Exactly.
Another shift that we've seen lately is that when this kind of got started, we were seeing vehicle stops. Right. This is because of Kibby Mayoras, now Kibby Nome, that says that in at least our counties down in most of Southern California, they can't do knock and talks,
right.
Just walk up to the house and try to engage in a quote unquote consensual conversation because the real purpose is deportation. Right. So they're basically lying. So there's a motion for summary judgment against that practice in effect. So they moved to waiting outside the houses for the people to get into their vehicles to drop off their kids to school or go shopping or go to work or whatever. Sometimes stopping people right when they were getting in, but very often tailing the vehicle and turning on the lights and stopping it as if it was like a police type traffic stop. But those first kind of cases that we saw since the beginning of the year, they were targeted arrests. They were people that were on ICE's radar because they had a recent arrest or a prior removal order or both,
right.
Or they never had status in the first place and had an arrest and got on ICE's radar that way. And so when ICE actually stopped the vehicle, they would be asking corroborating questions. Are you so-and-so? Show me your ID, comparing them to photos, that sort of thing. I've seen ICE documentation about this. But lately, it seems like they're just going crazy and just openly racially profiling. Yep. And stopping people, even if they're not doing targeted arrests. Mm-hmm. And so that's why we had this video. Was it at Redlands the other day, where a woman was exercising her right? She said, "I don't give consent. Yeah. Who are you looking for? I'm not going to show you my ID. I'm not going to answer questions." ICE backed off.
Yeah.
Very similar to a video that came out of, I think it was El Monte, somewhere in the SGV. They stopped a cyclist, jornalero-looking cyclist, but there was bystanders, and they were filming, and there were multiple people, and they said, "Do you know who he is? Do you have any reason to suspect that?" Whatever. They basically were intervening, but verbally, right? Not obstructing, and challenging ICE on those pretextual or racial profiling stops, and in that case too, ICE backed off. So I think, we try to be cautious about warning people, training people, how do you legal observe, what can you do, what's legal to say, what isn't. You can tell people their rights, you can tell people to ask for a judge, you can tell people they don't have to speak and whatnot. But I think if people feel comfortable enough to speak up and say, hey, this is the law, and challenge them on the spot, especially if there's filming and witnesses, that can go a long way to stop hopefully, or at least put a monkey wrench in the system of the racial profiling based arrests. And if we can demonstrate or document racial profiling or people having their rights violated even though they're being asserted, that helps us basically get the case thrown out entirely. Motion to suppress, motion to terminate. It's a little bit of work, but it's way better than trying to actually having to fight the case. Which, if you're filing bond paperwork, then you don't want to. If there's a reason to get a motion to suppress or terminate, then you don't want to file bond paperwork because you're going to be filing identity stuff. Right. So it gets very complicated in terms of doing that intake with the detainee, finding out exactly what happened, maybe getting a witness statement, affidavit, and hopefully before they get somebody in there that's going to be filing something that could mess up the whole case.
Yeah. So you mentioned it earlier, but I think we should talk a little bit more in depth about it for folks who don't know. Kibby Mayoras, or now Kibby Nome, since we have a new Secretary of Homeland Security, litigation that ICIJ was an organizational plaintiff on that really restricts the way immigration enforcement can happen in Southern California, from I think it's like Ventura County to our county, right, to San Bernardino, Riverside.
San Luis Obispo, Santa
San Luis
Barbara,
Obispo, sorry,
Ventura, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside.
and Orange.
And Orange, yes.
In
correct.
Orange, yeah. So those counties, those regions are the ones in which immigration enforcement is kind of restricted, at least in terms of what they're able to do outside of those regions. So talk to us a little bit about the things they cannot do under that lawsuit.
So there's a motion for summary judgment. It's a court order that says that in those counties, ICE cannot do a tactic that they call knock and talk, which means they go up to the door of a home, private residence, and knock on the door and try to engage in a conversation with the people that answer the door to get information, and then they use that information to detain and deport people. So the judge found that was basically an abuse of the access that the postal carrier or the Amazon delivery driver or whoever has to the front door, because the intention being to deport. So people they can't really give consent.
Yeah.
Because we have a Fourth and Fifth Amendment right? But one of the ways that we give up that right is by giving consent, right? And if ICE is lying to us at the door and saying that they are looking for information about somebody else or about a disturbance or a vehicle theft or something, whatever kind of ruses that they were throwing at us at the door, then they're really robbing us of the ability to truly give consent.
Yeah.
So there's a court order right now, which is why when we get calls to the hotline that report that ICE is going door to door in such and such neighborhood, our dispatchers are trained and so we take that with a grain of salt. Unless we see video or other kind of proof that that's actually going on, then we're probably not going to rush and send responders out to things that we're trained and experience has shown is not really going on.
Yeah.
At least in our region.
Yeah, no, that's good. And then those restrictions apply for folks in homes, single family homes, and in apartments as well.
Yeah, it's really any home.
Yeah.
It's just there's a little bit of a difference between about where agents are able to access a private single-family home, especially if it has a gate or something like that. They're not supposed to step beyond the property line.
The sidewalk.
The technical term is the curtilage. They're not supposed to go up the driveway, up the walkway, in the back, on the patio, porch, unless they have a judicial warrant, real legit warrant from a court, not the ones that they make themselves. In apartment buildings, it's a little bit different because multiple people have to have access to the entryway, the common area, the hallways, just to be able to get to their apartments. Yeah. And so ICE has, if the public has access to it, then ICE has access to it.
Right.
If you got to dial a code or something to get in, have a key, they have a concierge, then there's a little bit more protection there. Yeah. Similar with mobile home parks. You drive in and you park, and that whole area in the middle usually is open to the public. Yeah. And so, when they get up to the actual trailer and are start knocking on the door, if they're in our counties, they're more than likely violating kids. So what happened today in Thermal? I don't know. We're still getting, I think, doing intakes with people on the ground there today as we speak, and hopefully some video footage would come in. That might be a kid violation, or if they were out in the parking lot waiting for people to come out, maybe that's one of the ways that's like their workaround of kid.
Yeah, and I mean that is like a good rule that we tell folks in homes, workplaces, schools, hospitals, anywhere that us as pedestrians off the street can walk into. They could also, but beyond that, they would need that judicially signed warrant. And like you said, our dispatchers are trained to understand that is not a tactic that they use because they're prohibited under the current lawsuit. Not to say that they won't, they may, but in those cases, that's why it's super important for folks to get videos, to get photos, to get any kind of documentation that you can to share. And then we have that rule of three, that once we get three of the same, that's when folks are sent out and all that. One other thing that we hear a lot from folks about are checkpoints, ICE checkpoints, which I know we talk to community members all the time. That is not a tactic that ICE uses, but talk to us about that too.
Yeah, checkpoints in themselves are alarming, and people have years of trauma of losing their vehicles and having them taken away for 30 days and whatnot from before the AB 60 days from before 2015. So there's, especially in the immigrant community, obviously deep concern about checkpoints. Even to this day, the traffic, the DUI or driver license checkpoints, but I don't think ICE, if ICE were to set up a roadblock and check everybody for papers on a street or a highway or something like that, I think they would have serious Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment issues that would be immediately challenged in court. And so, and it's just, we just haven't seen them use that tactic.
Yeah.
Border Patrol, obviously, they have their standing checkpoints, right? In our Southern California, we know where they are. The one on the 5 at San Clemente, the one on the 15 at Temecula, the one down in Imperial at Jamul, and the one in Indio. All right. That's near the border. That's in the statute. They're able to stop people. They don't need warrants to stop people, interrogate them, and even, search the vehicle if they have probable cause, even though the bar is a little bit lower there. So when we hear reports about ICE checkpoints, we're like, probably not.
Yeah. And ICIJ on our social media, we have graphics of how to distinguish between ICE and Border Patrol, Customs and Border Patrol, how to distinguish between immigration enforcement and just your local police department or your county sheriff's department. And so, recommend those for folks too, because it's important to have those distinctions just to not cause mass panic over any little kind of law enforcement that we see in our communities.
I was going to add that before the National Guard and the Marines showed up, I would not believe that ICE would do checkpoints because they make themselves targets as well, stationary targets for folks to
show up and
not let them sleep,
It's bad OPSEC.
Yeah.
For them.
But now that they do have the National Guard and the Marines, right, I think it's more likely. Not more likely, but it's more of a possibility
that they'll get more ballsy with their efforts.
Yeah.
Their tactics.
Right. Because they're trying to meet a quota, right? These are instructions that are handed down from appointees in the Trump administration, like Stephen Miller, one of the authors of Project 2025, that, hey, our numbers are not doing so well. We need to up these numbers and have Border Patrol and ICE do more activity, do more operations, bend the rules, break the law, racial profile, in order to get these numbers. And we've heard that before. I think a lot of folks on social media and outside are comparing what is going on with ICE to the new Gestapo, right? The new show of force that was enacted by the Nazis during World War II to disappear people, to disappear Jews, disappear ethnic groups. And I think that there is a comparison there that needs to be talked about between the new workforce for ICE and Border Patrol, which is largely composed 50% plus of Latinos, right? So there's a meme that I shared with our producer here, Daniel, that he'll pull it up. Essentially, it's a Spider-Man meme that's pointing at all the Spider-Mans in a circle, and all of their names are Hernandez. And then you have the different agency above them that they work for, and one is an anti-ICE protester. So they're all pointing at each other because todos tienen la misma cara. They all have the same face, but they're all struggling and fighting amongst themselves, right? So there's a lot of euphemisms and metaphors that we can use to draw that out a little bit more, but I'll just open it up to you all to see what you guys are thinking about. When we're out there and seeing that Perez and Gutierrez are doing these arrests, disappearing people, how does that make you feel? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the most cowardly thing is how much they cover their face. Like, they're just completely cover their face so that you can identify what they look like. And, you can't even engage with them because they get violent and they get aggressive with you, even with folks that are just trying to be observers of what's going on, trying to tell the person that's being detained that, they have rights to remain silent and not sign anything.
Yeah, I think in some ways the fact that there are brown faces in powerful places, it really kind of undermines the Chicano nationalist vision of Aztlan and about, brown empowerment in the Southwest and whatnot, because we have that. We have brown mayors, we have brown, legislators, we have brown cops and brown ICE, and we have brown landlords and brown bosses, so to me, it's not about race. It's really more about class, although we should be proud of our culture and our heritage and whatnot, but not use it as an excuse to exploit our own or oppress our own people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think that's a really important contradiction that people are seeing, but they're not able to really pinpoint, like, why is it that this person is doing this to me and my family when they look like me, right? So I'm hoping that this can be that awakening moment where we go, okay, this is a class issue, because I just had mariscos with this guy last week, and now he's arresting my cousin, So why is that if we're both from the same ethnic group?
Sounds like a topic for a whole other episode.
It does. It is. So we'll get to that maybe in a future episode. And I think we're all exhausted with everything else going on. So we're going to wrap it up here. We're going to take a quick nap, and then we'll be back out on the streets doing some rapid response work.
Yeah. Follow ICIJ at IC4IJ. Look at all our social media posts where we post confirmed sightings that our trains dispatchers and observers have confirmed. Call our hotline whenever you see immigration enforcement in your community. Stay out there protesting. Stay out there legal observing, holding ICE accountable. Get them out of your community. And we'll be here on the next episode.